Bruce Willis was once the most famous actor in the world. From the streets of New York and Die Hard to the haunted hallways of The Sixth Sense, from the chaos of Pulp Fiction to the crumbling asteroid in Armageddon, his face on a poster was enough to make people show up. For 2 straight decades, across 12 award nominations, a Golden Globe, an Emmy, and a career built on one of the most distinctive voices Hollywood had ever put on a screen. Today, at 71, that voice is gone. The man who spent his childhood fighting a stutter so severe he believed he was broken has lost his language to a disease that has no cure, and for years the world mocked him for it without knowing a single thing about what was actually happening to him. The story of how Bruce Willis lost his voice begins with the fact that he almost never had one. Walter Bruce Willis was born in West Germany in 1955, the son of an American soldier and a German mother, and he grew up in Penns Grove, New Jersey, a working-class town where nobody had much, and standing out was rarely a good thing. Around the age of 6, the stuttering started, and it was severe and consistent in the way that makes a child dread every classroom question, every introduction, every moment that asks him to open his mouth in front of another person. He later described those years without any softening. There was no plan and no help behind it, just a kid flailing wildly for a really long time. He survived it the way cornered kids often do, by becoming funny before anyone else got the chance. He was the class clown, the one who made you laugh first so you couldn't laugh at him, and it worked well enough to carry him through school without ever fixing the thing underneath. The stutter was still there every single morning. Then, as a teenager, he walked into a drama class, and something happened that he would spend the rest of his life trying to explain. He memorized his lines, stepped onto the stage, opened his mouth, and the stutter was simply gone, completely, the moment he was in character. When he stepped back off the stage, it returned. He never fully understood the mechanism of it, but he understood exactly what it meant, because for the first time in his life, he had found a place the stutter couldn't follow him into. Turning that discovery into a career took years of small theater productions, bartending shifts in New York to keep the lights on, and auditions that led nowhere. Then, ABC cast him opposite Sybil Shepherd in a detective series called Moonlighting in 1985, and almost overnight, the industry understood what it had been overlooking. David Addison was fast, funny, and impossible to ignore, and the show ran on a rhythm unlike anything else on television at the time. The rapid, improvised banter, the comic timing that made every line land harder than it should have, and underneath all of it, a warmth that kept the character from tipping into smugness. Willis won the Golden Globe, then 2 Emmys, and television had made him a star. What television had really done was hand him a platform to show off something that would soon be worth far more than any TV contract. His voice carried a quiet current of intelligence underneath the charm, always suggesting this was a man working something out a half step ahead of the room, and it had a vulnerability that most action star voices were built specifically to hide. He sounded like someone genuinely figuring things out as he went. Hollywood had seen leading men by the hundreds, but it had not seen quite this combination, and it was about to learn what the combination was worth. On the 15th of July, 1988, Fox released a film with a $28 million budget and an unconventional man at the center of it. The studio paid Bruce Willis $5 million to carry the picture, close to a fifth of the entire production budget, which was a staggering bet on an actor still known mostly for a television show. The bet was not widely understood at the time because Willis was not the kind of body Hollywood built action movies around. He bled, he panicked, he swore at himself, and he spent most of the film barefoot and increasingly desperate, which was exactly the point. Die Hard grossed around $140 million worldwide and permanently changed what an action film was allowed to be. John McClane worked because Willis made fear look like courage in real time, and the quips landed as something other than bravado. They were a man talking himself through something that genuinely terrified him. The voice did most of the heavy lifting, carrying the sarcasm that covered the panic and the exhaustion that never quite collapsed into defeat. Every line sounded like it was costing him something, and that was what made every small victory feel earned instead of inevitable. The American action hero got a new template that summer, and it was built almost entirely on the specific texture of one man's voice and the believability of one man's fear. For a kid from Penns Grove, who once could not get a single word out without losing it, the distance between that high school stage and Nakatomi Plaza was almost impossible to measure. At the peak of that success, Willis came close to dismantling all of it in a single week. In early 1997, he was shooting a film called Broadway Brawler in Wilmington, Delaware. a project he was also producing, and partway through the shoot, he fired the director and several key crew members. Disney, which was financing the film, shut the production down with $17 million already spent, and the relationship between one of Hollywood's biggest stars and one of its most powerful studios was suddenly in real trouble. What happened next was a quiet negotiation that almost nobody outside the room ever fully understood. Rather than walk away from each other, Disney pressed Willis into a make-good arrangement, a commitment to deliver future projects at reduced terms, a way of working the debt off on screen instead of in a courtroom. It was not the outcome anyone had planned, and it became one of the luckiest accidents of his entire career. The arrangement fed straight into some of the most commercially successful films Willis ever made. Armageddon arrived in 1998 and became one of the highest-grossing films of the year. Then, on the 6th of August, 1999, The Sixth Sense reached theaters, directed by a then-unknown filmmaker named M. Night Shyamalan, and carrying a back-end participation deal that would eventually pay Willis far beyond his upfront fee on a film that grossed $672 million worldwide. The man who had nearly burned down his relationship with a major studio walked back through the very obligation that the fire had created. Very few disasters in Hollywood stay disasters, as long as the star at the center of them is still valuable enough. What the blockbusters tended to obscure was how much more Willis could actually do. When Quentin Tarantino cast him in Pulp Fiction in 1994, the role had nothing of the action hero in it. Butch Coolidge is a man carrying a private code of honor through a world with no use for it, and he never quips. He watches, he waits, and when the moment finally comes, he makes a choice that costs him everything and makes it anyway. The Sixth Sense gave him a performance built almost entirely on stillness and wait, a man moving through the film like someone already carrying the answer to a question nobody has asked him yet. Unbreakable took the comic book origin story and dressed it as quiet domestic grief, with Willis playing it at a patience and a melancholy that most action stars would never have thought to look for. In all three films, the voice drops and the timing slows, and the charm doesn't disappear so much as step aside to let something heavier come through. What's left is a man who sounds like he's been carrying something for a very long time and has made a rough peace with the weight of it. The audience that watched Die Hard and the audience that watched The Sixth Sense were watching the same instrument played two entirely different ways, once at full volume, once barely above a whisper. Then came the stretch of years the world completely misread. Between 2020 and 2022, Bruce Willis appeared in 22 films, low-budget, direct-to-video action movies, the kind that sell on poster recognition and foreign distribution rights rather than on reviews or box office. The conditions on those sets told a story that the films themselves did not. Shoots were capped at 2 days, his contracts limited him to 8-hour days, and insiders later told the Los Angeles Times that he was often only present for around 4 of them. His dialogue was cut down to what he could deliver in short, manageable bursts, and on some productions, his lines were fed to him through an earpiece. Some directors noticed that something was wrong and kept the cameras rolling anyway, and others noticed the same thing and quietly walked away from the work. In 2021, the Razzies built a dedicated category around his output and handed him the award for Worst Performance. Audiences and critics had landed on their verdict. Bruce Willis had checked out, a once great star reduced to a brand being liquidated, trading on a name he could no longer be bothered to earn. That version of the story hardened fast into something that felt like settled fact. Then, on the 30th of March, 2022, the family released a statement. Bruce Willis had been diagnosed with aphasia, and he was stepping away from acting. Within days, the Los Angeles Times published the investigation that reframed everything that had looked like indifference. The 2-day shoots, the compressed schedules, the adjustments that producers had been quietly engineering around a man whose capacity was visibly narrowing. What the culture had spent 2 years reading as a washed-up star cashing checks had been a health crisis managed in real time inside a business model. The Razzies rescinded their award the very next day. The aphasia announcement answered one question and immediately opened a far larger one. Aphasia is a language disorder affecting the ability to speak, to find words, to communicate at all, and for most people it arrives suddenly after a stroke or a brain injury. When it appears gradually instead, with no clear triggering event behind it, it usually points to something deeper. In November of 2022, the family began using a more specific term, primary progressive aphasia. Then, on the 16th of February, 2023, they released a second statement with an updated diagnosis. Bruce Willis had frontotemporal dementia, a progressive degenerative brain disease with no treatment and no cure. The family's own statement described it plainly as cruel. FTD is the most common form of dementia in people under the age of 60, and it does not announce itself through memory the way most people picture dementia doing. It begins instead with language, with behavior, with personality, the specific set of things that make a person recognizably himself. For a man whose entire instrument had always been his language, the disease had started by going after the one thing he was built on. Then comes the detail that changes the shape of the entire story. In a 2024 interview, Emma Hemming Willis described the earliest signs, the first moments when she noticed something shifting in the way Bruce communicated, and she did not read it as a disease. She thought it was his stutter. The changes in his language were subtle enough and familiar enough that she filed them under something she had known about him for years. In her own words, as his speech started changing, it seemed like it was just part of a stutter, just part of Bruce. The disease that would eventually take his voice had hidden itself inside the exact battle he had been fighting his whole life. What followed the diagnosis was something Hollywood almost never manages to produce. In an industry built on managed images, bitter settlements, and the careful separation of former lives from current ones, Bruce Willis's illness became the shared responsibility of everyone who had ever loved him, held together without a visible fracture and without competition. The February 2023 statement did not go out under Emma's name alone. It was signed by Emma, by Demi Moore, and by all 5 of his daughters, Rumor, Scout, and Tallulah from his first marriage, Mabel and Evelyn from his second. 5 daughters and 2 women who, by the usual logic of Hollywood, had every reason to be standing on opposite sides of this story, all standing on the same one. Demi Moore was asked in a 2024 CNN interview about the family's dynamic in the years since the diagnosis, and her answer was short and exact. They were family, she said, and that was the entire explanation. Emma, in the same stretch of time, had become something well beyond a caregiver, a public advocate, a political organizer, a voice for the millions of families navigating FTD without a famous name to open any doors. She wrote a book about the caregiving experience, and she lobbied the California legislature, which went on to pass a resolution establishing an annual FTD Awareness Week. Interview after interview, she described what the disease actually looks like from inside a family, past the clinical summary and into the daily reality of watching someone you love become unreachable by inches. More recently, she shared something that stopped a lot of the people who heard it. Bruce, she said, does not know that he has the disease. He never connected the dots, and she said she was grateful for that. He is still present, and he still recognizes the people who love him. Whatever else FTD has taken from him, it has not yet taken that. In March of 2026, Emma stood at the Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration's Hope Rising benefit in New York and announced the launch of the Emma and Bruce Willis Fund for Dementia Research and Caregiver Support. The fund was built around 3 goals: to advance the scientific understanding of FTD, to strengthen the support systems that caregivers depend on, and to make sure families facing the disease feel seen instead of abandoned. She accepted the evening's award on behalf of both of them. Bruce was not in the room. She said he would be proud of it. That same month, the family confirmed what had first been reported in late 2025. After Bruce's death, his brain will be donated to scientific research, a decision made by the entire family, Emma, Demi Moore, and all 5 daughters, in full agreement. Emma's words on it were brief and exact. This is emotionally difficult but scientifically necessary. Post-mortem brain tissue is currently one of the only ways researchers can study what FTD actually does at the cellular level. The protein deposits, the structural damage, the precise mechanics of a disease that is still, in a lot of ways, badly understood. The Willis family's donation will not cure anyone living with FTD right now. It may give the researchers who eventually do the thing they need most. In May of 2026, the fund made its first grant, sending the money to the same organization that had carried the family through the worst of it. It was, as Emma put it, only the beginning. This is where the Bruce Willis story has moved. It lives now in a research fund, in a brain that will go to science, in a caregiver's book, and in a blended family that chose, at the moment it mattered most, to stay in formation rather than scatter. The boy from Penn's Grove who found his voice on a stage and built a career the world is not going to forget is leaving behind something that has nothing to do with the movies at all. It is quieter than anything he ever put on a screen, and it stands to outlast every frame of it. If this story moved you, you are exactly where you belong. Off Script publishes new documentaries every week, the real stories behind the names you grew up watching. Subscribe so you never miss the next one, and drop a comment below. We would love to know what part of Bruce's story you never knew. We will see you in the next one.